Hello, everyone, and welcome to How Motivational Transparency Can Transform Teams. We are so glad you are here to join us today. My name is Lucy Sullivan. I'll be your co-host today, along with my colleague, Kayla Burnett, and a little bit of business and housekeeping to get started. I know everyone has spent plenty of time on Zoom, so this is probably old hat by now, but just a little bit of how the webinar will work. We are recording today's webinar, so you'll get a link to the recording, to the slides. We do a blog post that has a summary of key points and Q&A. All of that will be coming to your inbox, so no worries about that. To stay focused during the webinar, we have the chat closed, your cameras are off, but we absolutely want to hear from you. So any questions that you have anytime throughout the webinar, you can put those in the Q&A box and we'll answer them during the designated Q&A breaks. But you don't need to wait for those to go ahead and ask your questions. If something is coming up for you, go ahead and put it in the Q&A. And any questions that we don't manage to get to during our time together today, we will answer offline. So we'll make sure you get your answers. So anything that you're curious about, please feel free to pop that in the Q&A. And let me tell you a little bit about who you're hearing from today. So we're MRG, Management Research Group. We're a global leader in assessment design, and we have assessments for leadership, motivation, which you'll be hearing about today, personal development, and sales. They're all designed for self-awareness. That's the ultimate goal for us. We've been supporting coaches with assessments for 40 years and also working closely with coaches and doing a lot of coaching ourselves. So we're also on the ground and have a lot of experience. We do have more than 2 million assessment participants in our database. Our head of research informed us recently. So we leverage that in our work along with a lot of lived experience in coaching. You'll also be hearing today from Drew Rand. He is an IO psychologist here at MRG and in his own practice. Drew has a huge breadth of experience in consulting, coaching, developing leadership programs, and works with leaders around the world. And you'll also hear with Christine Chaussee. Christine is an executive coach and an educator here at MRG. She's been with MRG for over 15 years, and she's an ICF certified coach, also has a huge breadth of experience in coaching clients around the world. And she plays a critical role in our education program as well, with creating education materials and training new consultants. So they're both bringing a lot of great experience to the table today. That's who you'll be hearing from. And what we'll be going through in part one, we'll just take a look at where conflict comes from in teams. Where is this tension arising from? In part two, we'll take a look at measuring motivation and one possible strategy to help uncover what can be so unobservable and causing tension. At that point, we'll take a Q&A break. And in the last part of the webinar, we'll look at a case study. So we'll actually walk through a scenario with a real team and how they use motivational transparency to help them work together more effectively. We'll do Q&A again after that. So a quick poll, I would love to get started with just hearing from folks. It's always interesting to know how much something like this comes up in your work. So if you're working with teams to the extent that you have, if you can weigh in and let us know about how often you feel like this is coming up when you work around teams. Interested to see where this falls for you all. We'll give just a minute for people to get their answers in. We have our suspicions, but it's always fun to see what the flash poll holds. All right, I'm going to share our results. And let's see. So yeah, for 14% are pretty lucky to have some smooth sailing teams, but that's definitely the minority. We have 57% say it comes up in at least half the teams they work with, and almost a third, 29%, saying it's extremely common and we deal with a lot of team conflict. And certainly that's one of the reasons a team might call you in. So one of the reasons we're here today. All right, I will stop sharing our poll. I will shut our cameras off and I will hand things over to Drew to get us started.
All right. Thank you so much, Lucy. I appreciate it. Pleasure to be with you all this morning or this afternoon or wherever you are in the world. I want to start today with a quick story. This happened to me a handful of years ago in a coaching engagement, and it is the perfect, I think, story or lead up to what we're talking about today. I was coaching a chief strategy officer for quite a large organization. We'll call him Kyle. And Kyle is what I like to call a recovering attorney. And he, yes, was in this chief strategy role and had been in the role for a couple of years. he had the CEO, we'll call him Bill, who had been at the organization for quite a while, and they had a pretty good relationship. Bill and Kyle did, and one day they are in an executive team meeting, and they're talking about a direction or a decision that is being made. And Kyle and Bill get into it. They get into it about this decision or the direction that the organization is going. And apparently, things get a little bit heated, right? So they go after it for each other for a handful of minutes. Things finally calm down. Meeting eventually adjourns, and everyone goes back to their offices. A few hours later, Bill, the CEO, walks down the hallway and pokes his head into Kyle's office, the gentleman who I'm coaching, the chief strategy officer, and again, the recovering attorney. And he says, "Hey, Kyle, I got to apologize about earlier today. That's just not how we do things here. I feel badly about it, and next time let's keep level heads and just be a little bit kinder moving forward." And this is how Kyle tells me the story. He says he cocks his head like a confused dog and looks at Bill and says, "Bill, what are you talking about?" And Bill, just as confused, says back to Kyle, "Well, the executive team meeting earlier today where we were yelling at each other." And Kyle says, "Yelling at each other? We weren't yelling at each other. We're having a spirited debate about a big decision this organization is making, and I think we work through some things. I think actually we should be doing that more often." So you have two people, same exact situation. They're the two people in the situation, two extremely different interpretations about what just happened. One, the CEO, thinking, "Oh, I can't believe I embarrassed myself. I can't believe we did that in front of people. Did I injure any relationships? Maybe I hurt my reputation." Kyle, on the other hand, saying, "That was kind of fun. I actually really like that. And I think that we should do more of it." So, same situation, two different people, two different interpretations about what just happened. Really interesting. And we'll come back to it in a second. So, team dynamics. You just filled out a poll, and 86% of you said that these things come up, right? I would be in agreement with the third that said they come up all the time. I think it's at the root cause of a lot of issues at work. A little bit of research here that I think pulls out the importance of it all, but I don't even know that we need the research. I think we all know that team dynamics are a really big impact in the workplace, and that also interpersonal conflict can be a big part of whether or not team dynamics are working or not working. So let's talk today about motivation and recognizing potentially the root cause of team tension. So what leads to conflict, right? In my experience, most people have good intentions, right? People aren't trying to cause problems. You don't walk into the office saying, "You know what? I'm going to make everybody's life miserable today." I don't see that happening. Do you have some bad apples out there? Yeah, sure. But most people, I think, genuinely show up with good intentions. So if it's not bad intentions, what is it, right? Could be a difference of opinion, right? It could be a difference in decision-making styles. Could be a difference in risk tolerance. These are all differences that might play a role in terms of what leads to this conflict. But what leads to these differences? Like where do these differences potentially come from? Well, I think you can think about this in a couple of different ways. The first is, the things that are potentially above the surface, the perspective on the situation. I want a specific outcome. Potentially organizational cliques or politics. I like this person, so I'm going to agree with them versus this person. And these are the ones that we often focus on because they're external. We can see them. They are unique to the situation. They can be changed very quickly. At the same time, and do they lead to differences? Yeah, fundamentally, I believe that they do, right? I believe that they do. But in my experience, there's something else that leads to and is a more consistent lever in terms of what leads to these differences. And that is what's below the surface. And for me, that's really about motivation and emotional energy, right? And what's interesting about this is we often overlook something that is so important that can lead to these potential differences, right? And it's important to remember that these things are more consistent and lasting. They are core to who you are as an individual, and they can be a driving force in these interpersonal differences. And what I always, in terms of them being consistent and lasting, I always tell people when I'm working with them, yes, you have a set of motivations right now, and they are a culmination of your life experience, right? If you were to have done this, if you were to work with me 5 years earlier or 5 years later, would you have different life experience, and might that change things for you? Yeah, of course. But there's probably some things about you where you were that way when you were 8, you were that way when you're 21, you're that way when you're 42, and you're going to be that way when you're 77. And they play a really big role in your life and how you see things, how you interpret events, right? Like Kyle and Bill. So let's talk about motivation and emotional energy. Very simply, motivation, what drives or attracts you, or on the opposite, what drains or repels you. And again, it is not what you see on the outside, right? Motivation is not external, it's internal. You can't observe it. And I will come back to that in a second about why that is so important. So let's dig deeper into what it is and what it isn't. First thing I want to do is make a really big distinction between behavior and motivation because they are not the same. First things first, behavior. It's an action, a habit, a pattern, or an activity that you engage in. While motivation is something that within you that drives you, excites you, moves you forward, energizes you, gives you energy, or on the flip side, maybe you have very finite energy for it, right? Behavior is something that you can observe. You can observe people's behavior. You can even potentially observe your own. At the same time, motivation is not observable. I can't observe yours. You can't observe mine. Again, this is really important. I'll come back to why this is so important in a second. Behavior might reflect the environment or a specific situation, right? We react very quickly behaviorally in terms of what the situation is giving us or not giving us, or what the situation is telling us, what we think the situation is telling us to do or not telling us to do. Whereas motivation, on the other hand, often is quite intrinsic and stays consistent, even when the circumstances change. Your motivation does not change day in and day out. You're going to wake up tomorrow with the same motivation. And while the situation or the environment may change, your motivation probably will not, right? And how you feel about it may not. Finally, behavioral patterns develop over time, but those individual behaviors might differ from day to day. While your motivation, again, your strongest motivations often develop early and stay with you for most of your life, right? Do these things develop and change? Yes, as I just said a second ago, about 5 years before or 5 years after. But I truly believe that there are some things that are very core to people that change less. So what does motivation sound like? Well, first things first. When I start something, I feel like I have to see it through. I can't walk away from a project that's half finished. This is somebody who's saying, I get a lot of satisfaction, a lot of energy from just pushing through a challenge, just gritting my teeth and working through it. And by the time I get to the end, I'm really satisfied by the fact that I pushed through those challenges. The motivation is the challenge itself. I feel uneasy when I don't understand exactly what the rules are in a given situation, right? This is somebody who's motivated potentially. I want to do it the right way. I don't want to make a mistake. And to not make a mistake, I need to know what the rules are. So their motivation takes them to a place of trying to understand what they are. What are the bounds in which I can behave or make decisions? Oh, excuse me. I feel like I come alive when I'm in front of a crowd. This is someone saying, I get motivation when I'm up in front of people. I'm not saying that you're a wildly extroverted person, but when you're up in front of people, I find that actually quite satisfying. Ugh, I hate asking other people for help. I'd always rather tough it out on my own. This is somebody with a motivation to be really self-sufficient, maybe not have dependent relationships, maybe have the motivation or the freedom to do things how they want to do them when they want to do them. Competition brings something out in me, even if it's just a board game I love to win. This is a motivation to compete, right? These individuals often see the world through a win-lose mindset or a win-lose lens, and everything is a competition. It doesn't matter what it is, right? And obviously they want to be on the winning side. So what's interesting about this is that in terms from a motivational point of view, some people can recognize or even articulate a few of these things, right? When I'm working with people, often they will say, yeah, that makes sense. I agree with that. But comprehensive self-awareness of your own motivation is next to impossible. And I think it's next to impossible for a few reasons, which I want to talk about right now. So 4 key things to understand about motivation. First things first, motivational factors originate from your formative years and evolve slowly over time, right? These are things that start developing again in those early years of your life, and they will develop over time. And yes, they change, as I've mentioned. And while you might recognize your own behavior quite easily, it can be much more challenging to be in touch with what your underlying drivers are. It can be more challenging to know or to understand, why did I do that? Why do I feel this way? Why am I engaging in that behavior? And that's where the underlying drivers come from, or talk about, excuse me. Many people will be surprised by how strong or weak some of their motivations are compared to others, right? So it's really, truly difficult to have a fully objective view of yourself. As I said a second ago, people often will say, yeah, that makes sense. I agree with that, right? But they might be surprised by some of their really strong motivations and some of their weaker ones. And what ends up happening here is that people often, with these extreme motivations, are very likely to underestimate this extremity. So now I want to come back to, again, the importance of the fact that motivation is not observable. Because what happens is, because motivation is not observable, you tend to normalize it over the course of your lifetime. What do I mean by that? Well, you can't measure yourself against others because you can't observe it. If you walk into a room and someone is yelling, that's a behavior you could say, oh, that person is angry. I'm not as angry as they are, right? But you cannot observe their motivation. So you don't have a barometer or a framework to measure yourself against others. And therefore, over the course of time, you tend to normalize how you feel about things, how you see things, right? Isn't this normal? I think this is normal. This feels normal. But I can promise you, you all have some motivations that are not normal, right? There you will have some that are on the extremes. And then finally, motivation can conflict with itself, meaning your motivations don't always align. They don't always push you in one direction versus another. And very often they can conflict. And this is when we often feel friction, right? I want to do this, or I'm feeling pulled this way, but at the same time, I'm feeling pushed that way. Very often, that feeling, that friction, or that conflict within yourself comes from a place of motivation, and you have differing motivations trying to tell you different things to do, so they can interfere with one another. So, how do we measure motivation? How do we uncover the unobservable? Well, here at MRG, we use the individual directions inventory, or the IDI for short. And what the IDI looks at is 17 different motivational dimensions. I'm not going to walk through each one of these, but you can see the 17 here on the screen, and they are put into 6 different clusters, right? And within each of these clusters, they all speak about something. They all speak about something in common when they're in a particular cluster. And on the right-hand side, you see a profile, and you can see this individual has some extreme scores, right? So got some scores on the higher side, some really low scores. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of understanding where your extreme scores are and how that potentially colors the way that you see the world or interact with the world. So let's come back to our story. We've got Kyle, the chief strategy officer, the recovering attorney, as I like to call him. We've got Bill, the CEO, and again, they had just got into it in an executive team meeting, and their interpretation of that event was entirely different, right? Was entirely different. So let's think about it from an IDI point of view. Kyle, well, let's talk about affiliating and challenging first of all. Excuse me. So affiliating were those four dimensions on the screen a second ago that really, and what these really talk about is a person's motivation, interpersonal motivation. What are relationships a forum for, right? And people who score high in these dimensions are very often drawn toward people, attracted to relationships. They appreciate intimacy. They like collaboration and teamwork. They like expressing their opinions and sort of the freedom and all of that. There is a lot of emotion, and they get a lot of satisfaction out of that. On the flip side, someone who is lower in these dimensions will not get nearly as much motivation from everything that I just described, and may be a little bit more objective in how they approach things. And relationships don't do as much for them. They would approach them very differently. Challenging, on the other hand, the three dimensions that reside within the challenging cluster all talk about how do we deal with opposing forces in the world, right? As things come up, what is our motivation to deal with them, right? Are you direct and assertive and aggressive and maybe competitive, and I'm going to take control and I want to really influence the outcome? Or on the flip side, are you somebody who's maybe a little bit more indirect, maybe a little bit more passive, less competitive, don't see it through that lens? And therefore, when things come up, you're potentially the result of that motivation is a little less assertive, maybe a little less aggressive, or a little less direct in how you deal with it. So on the one side, we have Bill, right, the CEO, who is higher affiliating and lower challenging. His motivations are higher in the affiliating bucket that bring him closer to people and appreciating relationships. And then also when things come up, he's a little bit more passive. And the way that he would view things would be that things potentially can get contentious rather quickly. On the flip side, we've got Kyle, higher challenging, lower affiliating, right? His approach to conflict is A, well, I kind of like it, first of all. And B, I'm going to be more assertive and direct in it. And I might not even view it as conflict, right? It gives me a lot of energy, and I like engaging in it. And at the flip side, lower affiliating, I'm concerned less potentially about relationships, how it reflects upon me. I'm thinking less about people and the relationships that I'm in. And so what ends up happening is exactly the story that I told you, where someone's motivational profile is really colors how they interpret an event, right? One person, I can't believe that happened. I didn't like that. It doesn't feel good to me. The other, I really liked it, and I think that we should do it more often. And if you don't know these things about each other, it very often can lead to continuing conflict, right? Because one person is approaching it in one way and the other person is approaching it another way, and you don't really know why. And then here we're just talking, I'm talking about two people. Let's put it together in a team, right? If you have a team, you got people all over the place in terms of these 17 dimensions, right? With high stability or low independence or high belonging or high winning, right? Or, low gaining stature. These things all play a huge role in, again, the lens that we see the world through, why we make the decisions that we make, why we engage in particular behaviors, and again, why we interpret things the way that we interpret them. And they all can lead to the interpersonal conflict or the downgraded team dynamics that we're talking about. And one of the ways to potentially address team conflict is to think about motivation and how it plays a role and work through that. This is what Christine's going to talk about here in the second half of today. So I will pause there. What questions do we have so far that I can answer?
Sure. So one question, Drew, could you talk about, and I feel like this comes up a lot when we talk IDI. So first of all, folks, yeah, Q&A is open. Anything related to this, go ahead and drop your questions in. We're happy to have them. So one of our questions is, can you talk about how core values relate to motivation?
Yeah, good. So first of all, if there's a Venn diagram of motivation and values, is there overlap? Yes, I think they are, but also I think they are distinct. So when I am working with people and talking about motivation, I tend to actually avoid the word values, because values is a heavy word. Let's put it that way. There's a lot of connotations to it, and I think there is a distinction between motivation and values. Is there overlap? Yes, I think there is. But you can be motivated to do something that might not necessarily be in alignment with your values. Also, the other thing I mean, I could talk about this for a while, but I'll keep it short. The other thing I'll just say here is values to some people are much more important than other people. Some people pay attention to what their values and their principles are a lot more than other people. I personally, I think that is a motivation, right? What's the motivation to pay attention to your values or your principles versus not? And it's not about ethics or morality, but how much do you make decisions in light of what your values and your principles are? So again, that Venn diagram, is there overlap? I do believe so, but I also think they're distinct constructs. I think they're distinct variables.
Another question just about motivation. Does similar motivations equal less conflict? Like, do two people who have similar motivational profiles, are they more likely to gel and get along?
Good question. Simple answer is yes, right? Simple answer is yes, because very often they will see things through the same lens, right? They will experience the world in similar ways, and that just leads to more agreement, right? I like to know the why a decision's being made, but I don't care about the how. Great. So do I. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the why, and I feel good about that, and so do you. Perfect. Off we go, right? But if you have two people who are the opposite, where I care about the why and another person cares about the how, we just often miss, right? So very often aligned profiles do just naturally get along better. What I will say though is the more that this is out in the open, the more it allows people to potentially calibrate themselves or understand why somebody might want to be communicated in a particular way or why they appreciate something versus not, and allows you to be potentially more intentional about how you might interact with that person.
I think I'll add a little sort of like an asterisk or something that I think will hint at what Christine's going to get at in the second section. Getting along better, less friction, yay. Necessarily the most effective team, possibly not, because if you've got everybody approaching things from the same perspective and they all, know you don't have that healthy, all the diversity of kind of paths to something. So
100%.
yeah.
100%. Yes. If it was, let's just as an example, in the example that I gave, if everyone was like Bill, conflict would never be addressed. We wouldn't talk about it. We'd avoid it all the time, and we and we might never solve anything, right? So it's not that we want everybody in the team to have the same motivations. That's not the goal, and that never happens. But it really is about understanding where potentially people are coming from.
And actually, Janine just popped into the Q&A, read my mind, and was saying, follow up on this in terms of, the tendency toward groupthink if you have, similar social, and can you get sort of feeling too comfortable? I guess, do you have any perspective or ideas for if you do have a group where motivations are really similar, how do you work on combating that kind of groupthink or the comfort of not having any conflict, not having different approaches?
So so absolutely correct, by the way. This is where it makes the unseen seen in some way, right? So if you have a group where there are a lot of alignment in the motivations, the key to working with that team is understanding where they will get hung up, right? Where do you need to remember to be more intentional, right? We are a more passive group. Great, that's going to feel good all of the time. Is that the best decision for you? Probably not, right? And so where do you need to put things in place to say, you know what, I feel like this is one of those times where we're all happy with being passive, but I don't think being passive is helpful for us right now. And I think we need to like work through this. But knowing the team motivation and knowing that that's something that will happen allows for somebody to raise their hand and be like, I think this is the thing that we're supposed to be working on. Because if it's not out in the open, it's difficult to attack it.
We have a little more time for questions. One question, and we don't have Maria on this webinar, so I'm not sure how much we want to speak to it fully, but what is the impact of intercultural role things in dynamics, I guess, in motivation? And I believe the studies we have from Maria would say that in general, not a lot of specific patterns, but Drew, please go ahead if you have anything to say there.
So the research that MRG has is geographical, right? So we have different norms that would talk about motivation. We'd also look at different, industries. Yeah, Maria talk more about this, but what I would say is it's less than you might think it is. There are very simply, motivation is kind of universal in some way. And what we see is there are not huge differences between this industry or that industry or this geographic region versus that geographic region. There are certainly smaller preferences, but it's not they're not huge differences.
Another question, I think this is important because this is about the way we use the word motivation. We have a question about what about team members who have low overall work motivation? Work is just a way to make income and that's it. Does that automatically spell out major conflict issues with the team? And I think it's important to answer this one because when we say motivation, we're not necessarily talking quantity, but I think it's an important thing to discuss.
Yeah. How do I want to answer that? So, very simply, work motivation. Everyone shows up to work with some form of motivation. Yes, maybe it's for a paycheck, but that's for a paycheck, or maybe it's not, and it's something else. What I can tell you is that in all of my work, using the IDI, talking with motivation, people do show up to work with some motivation to do this versus that. And while they might not be motivated to achieve or motivated to make sure that people are thinking about them in a particular way, there very often is something in the profile that will tell you why they're there, why they're doing this versus doing that. And it is, there's always something helpful in my experience in terms of looking at someone's motivation, even if it feels as if they are not quote unquote work motivated. Summarizing this very quickly, the IDI is not just about work, it's everywhere. Which is why it's one of my favorite assessments. Like it's applicable everywhere, not just your work life. It's also personal. Yeah, so I'll leave it there.
We have time for one more. Can motivation be situational or responsive in a way that behavior is?
The short answer is no, right? Your motivation does not change 10 minutes by 10 minutes, right? And this is why, and the correlation between motivation and behavior is not one-to-one, right? And this is the primary reason why. You have very distinct choice in terms of your behavior. You can recognize what the environment or the situation is asking for and engage in a particular behavior. That behavior might be in contrast to what you want to do, but yes, I want to go right, but I see in this situation that I should go left, right? And that is, you as a human being and being intentional about what that behavioral choice is. It's recognizing that I think this is going to work better or be more successful here than that one. And what I always tell people when I'm working with them in motivation is, the goal here is not to change it, because you can't wake up tomorrow and say, you know what, I'm going to be more motivated by creating today. Like it doesn't even make sense coming out of my mouth. But it's much more about understanding what your motivation means for you right here, right now, how it's playing a role in your life, and where potentially, yes, you need to be more intentional to make a better decision, right? Or put another way, your motivation is not always going to lead you to the best place. It can get very messy very quickly. And understanding where that might be, right? Those extremities, those highs, those lows can allow you to be potentially more intentional with your feelings, your thoughts, your actions, interpretations, decisions, so on and so forth.
All right, with that, I'm going to start to finish up the Q&A. We had one more question. Are you going to talk about how the MRG tools can be used for this kind of conflict stuff? That's yes. So we'll hand off to Christine, and she's going to talk. Again, we're talking today about the IDI, which is the tool that we use. She'll lead us through a case study that uses that very specifically. I know some folks with us today are familiar with the IDI already, maybe already use it. If you're not, and you're interested in checking it out and seeing how, and giving it a test drive and seeing how it might fit into your work, you can do that. We will pop a link in the chat where you can just click that link and that'll give you the next steps to give that a try and get more familiar with the tool if that sounds interesting to you. We do have a few more questions beyond that. We have another Q&A at the end. And again, we'll answer them all. If we don't get to them in the hour, we will get back to you later. So don't be shy about keeping those questions coming in. And with that, I will hand things off to Christine for part 2.
Great. Thank you, Lucy. Nice to be working with you all today. So I'm going to be talking about a specific team that we worked with in using motivation to help coach them. So first of all, let's talk about the process, the general process when you're working with teams using motivation. First, you want to start with the individual feedback. So it's really, if you're going to be working with a team, it's so important for each individual person to understand where they are coming from. And in doing so, they understand what their drivers are. They understand why they react to things in a particular way. And they start to get an understanding that, oh, other people may have these same types of drivers, and that's the beginning of getting them to understand their teammates better. So we always start with the individual feedback. Then we'll get into group sharing. So the first step, really, once they've gotten together as a group, is for them to start to share some of their own internal drivers with each other to foster understanding, to make sure that people are understanding that things are not necessarily personal when they're having differences of opinion, and just to get how to work better with each other. And then also another really valuable part is to look at the team as a group, to look at their scores as a group and see what are some things that might be helpful to us about our profile, or about our group profile? What might be getting in our way? What are some assumptions that we make? And that will counter some of the concerns that people brought up in the Q&A around, groupthink and everybody thinking the same and everybody, working the same way. What do you lose when that's the case? What do you lose when there's not diversity within a team? You can address that by analyzing the team. And then, of course, it's all great to know how we're motivated and what we look like, but always you want to make a plan, right? What are we going to do with this information? How can we use this information to help us to work together better? So let's talk about this particular team that we have. This was a nonprofit with a 5-person leadership team. They were located in New Hampshire and had programming throughout New England. They were a mixed gender group and mixed levels of experience. There were a couple of new people who came in. There was one who was brand new, and one was about 4 years, had been there for about 4 years. There were 2 longtime employees who had been there for a very long time, were very dedicated to the organization. And then the CEO had been there for about 9 years. So he was kind of in the middle. And so how were they doing? They were doing, in some ways pretty well. They had a dynamic CEO with lots of new ideas and excitement. He was a vibrant person. He was great with the board. He was very good at representing the organization externally. He had a lot of great ideas that he would bring to the team. However, there were a few on the team who were like, geez, man, we have all these meetings where there's lots of talk and there's not much coming out of them, and I feel like even though we get together and we do a lot of talking, I leave and I just go and work on my thing because that's what I need to do. I need to focus on my area. So, and even to the point where there were some things that the group were talking about that just weren't getting done. Deadlines were being forgotten. Things were not happening the way that people wanted them to. And specifically, there was a rebranding initiative that, the marketing manager and the CEO were big proponents of. They were pumped up about it, but it just didn't take off. Like there wasn't a lot of buy-in throughout the organization for this rebranding. And even on the leadership team, there was sort of tepid response to it. And that was really frustrating to the marketing manager and to the CEO, who was really pumped up about that. So definitely some issues to deal with. So, and some of the quotes from people when we interviewed them, one was, you wouldn't believe how often he drops the ball and no one seems to call him on it. That was specifically about the CEO. They just move on to the next thing. So yeah, they were hoping for a little more follow through. And then another person, I don't know how we can talk to each other this much, we have so many meetings, but I still feel like nothing's being communicated. I'm always out of the loop. And then I put so much work into that project. Then they all completely ignored it. They just didn't seem to care. And that's from the marketing manager, who was pretty frustrated about that rebranding initiative. So definitely some issues. So the reason we got into this engagement was by starting with the CEO. He was interested in learning about, how he could make his team work better. So we decided to start with him and give him his IDI and his motivational profile, and he got feedback from his coach. And doing that, feedback when you're dealing with the IDI or motivational assessment, it really is more of a conversation. It's never like, oh, you're high on this, so you must be this way. It's more like, wow, people who have this high energy in this particular area, sometimes they feel this way, sometimes they have this experience. Has that been your situation as well? And they can confirm it, or they can say, no, that's not quite that, but it looks like this for me. So it's really a conversation, and it's really about starting to understand yourself at a deeper level, to start to understand, here, oh, now I get why I feel that way when I have to do this thing, or now I understand why I made that decision in my life, or why I'm drawn to this particular area. It's so helpful. And again, we're not ever trying to change the emotional drivers or the motivations. We're trying to understand them, so a person can then make intelligent decisions, or can understand their emotional reactions to things and maybe regulate them a little bit better, or also to understand other people's emotional reactions to things. So initially, there was a little bit of defensiveness because he came in saying, hey, there's something wrong with my team here. And then we started with him, and it was like, whoa, okay, I guess I need to look at myself. So he decided, it was eye-opening for him. And he learned about his own motivational patterns. And he suspected that those patterns could be contributing to the team's struggles. And so he was open enough in order to want to look at that for himself and be transparent about that with his team. But he also wanted the team to have that same opportunity for self-awareness, and then for them to all understand each other better and to figure out what was holding them back. Okay, so we're lucky we had a really great CEO who was really open to this type of work. So we expanded to the rest of the team, and each of the members of the team took the IDI and got their individual feedback, and had that opportunity for those same one-on-one conversations to learn more about themselves, their drivers, and to start to consider, other people's drivers as well. Okay, so that was the step one. Then we got them together as a group, and we gave them these prompts. So after they had already received their individual feedback, we asked them to think about these things, choose 2 of these prompts, and be willing to share them. So the first one, this probably doesn't surprise you about me. That's a pretty easy one. This may surprise you. This drains me, so sometimes I actively avoid it. I can sometimes over-rely on this. Because of my motivations, sometimes I assume. So these are pretty deep things for people to reveal about themselves. But again, since all of them had gone through the process of understanding their internal drivers, their motivations, and since they were dedicated as a team to be working together better, they were open to doing it. So the CEO again started, and he was the first person to go forward and model transparency. So some of the examples that he came up with were his high entertaining score. So he gets energy from being in front of people and livening them up and making, situations more memorable. So he was like, yeah, probably doesn't surprise you that I get energy from making presentations and talking to crowds. And they're like, yeah, no, it doesn't surprise me at all. But it may surprise you that I'm not that comfortable expressing my emotions. Now, he was a dynamic presenter who used emotions in his presentations, but they weren't revealing of his own emotions necessarily. He wasn't really big on sharing, some of that internal stuff that was going on for him. So that was a bit of a surprise for people. His enduring score was low. Enduring is getting energy from persistence, tenacity, willpower. I said we're going to do this thing, so let's see it through. He was pretty low on enduring. And so he was like, sometimes I lose interest in projects once the initial startup phase has passed. And then creating. Creating is all about getting energy from new and different and trying new things and being open to, offbeat ideas and perspectives. And, he said, sometimes I get so excited about new ideas, I assume others are excited by them too. I think it's normal for everybody to get pumped up about new ideas. That's what I think, but I can see, wow, I'm a 95 compared to, other leaders who have taken this assessment that says I'm a little unusual, I'm a little different, and that's really good for me to know. So he went through and he expressed those. He shared that information about himself, and then each person on the team had the same opportunity to go about and share some of those prompts with the rest of the team, and people could ask each other questions. And just that in and of itself is a really powerful thing for a team to do, just to understand, wow, okay, I feel this way, but other people don't necessarily have the same motivation for things. Like, wow, that person really annoys me because they're really disorganized. It's not that they're trying purposely to annoy me. It's just that they don't have a large, a big driver for structuring. Whereas I love structuring, I love organization, precision, I love process and procedure. That makes me feel good and in control. All right. So it really helps people to understand each other, and it can really provide team bonding for people who are working together. So that's one huge benefit of using motivational coaching with teams. Now, the next step, though, is to actually analyze the group as a whole. So what we did is we gathered all their individual scores and we looked at them to try to see, what some of the patterns were. And we asked them to look at these questions. What about this group profile potentially strengthens us? What about this group profile potentially gets us in trouble? And what assumptions do we potentially make as a group? So we put them together, we had them look at all the scores, and then we asked them to discuss. And here were some things that they came up with. So what about this strengthens us? So what we saw on their group profile was that a lot of them had a lot of energy around giving, which is getting energy from providing others with support, affection, empathy, helping others, noticing others are, in need of help. And that strengthens us. I mean, it is a nonprofit organization. Probably, part of that motivation was why they decided to join an organization such as this. They care about each other. They care about the cause. So that's a strength from their perspective. And then what else strengthens us? Well, controlling is a motivation where people get energy from being in charge, having influence on others, having a certain sense of power. Well, there's quite a spread in controlling, which can be useful because it means not everybody's trying to take charge. Sometimes when you have a team where everybody's high and controlling, you've got too many cooks in the kitchen, and everybody's leading and nobody's really following. If you've got a team where there's no energy around controlling, sometimes people are sort of waiting around for somebody to jump in and take charge, right? So some variety in there is helpful. And given, that the CEO tends to be one of the people a little bit higher, that can be helpful if you are the person in charge. Doesn't mean if you have low controlling that you can't be in charge. It just means that sometimes it's a little easier. You just have to be a little more intentional if you're low controlling. He was a little higher on controlling, so it worked out well for him. Okay, so what are some things as they were looking at the group scores that potentially get us in trouble? Well, one thing that they noticed was that there were several of them, not just the CEO, who were lower on enduring. So again, enduring is about getting energy from persistence, tenacity, willpower, seeing things through. There's one outlier there, but there are several of them who, are quite low in that area, which suggests that, people are not getting a lot of energy from pushing things through to finish what they started. And then what are some assumptions that they make? So we noticed that many of them were high on independence. Independence is getting energy from freedom from exterior constraints, being self-sufficient. So they assumed, as they were working together, that people just kind of want to be left alone to do their thing. I'm going to work on my thing. They got it. They'll let me know if they need some help. But I just want to do my thing. So you can see where some of the silos were coming up because many of them were motivated in that particular direction. And then another assumption that many of them made was sticking with what we know is better. So stability is being motivated by keeping things safe and secure, knowing what's expected of you, knowing what's coming. So for those people, sticking with what they know is better. There was one particular outlier in there, but you can see where change might be a little bit of a hurdle to overcome. So those were some general observations that people made. And then when we looked at the rebranding specifically, we realized that, the creating was a little bit lower for people. So fewer people got energy from new and untested. So the rebranding launch felt premature and risky. That independence, again, more people get energy from being self-sufficient. So they assumed the rebranding was not their responsibility and that the marketing manager would ask for help if she needed it. Stability, more people were motivated by keeping things stable and secure. So they wanted more time with the rebranding to process the changes and ask questions. And enduring, fewer people got energy from being persistent and tenacious. So once the rebranding didn't take off, they weren't energized to see it through. So it was very interesting to look at this one particular initiative through the lens of the IDI. And then when we looked at it again from the CEO perspective, we could see where some of his frustration was coming in, right? So with creating, he got a lot of energy from creating, but not too many other people did. So he was all about the new rebranding. Some of the others were a little more cautious. Combine that with their higher stability score and his lower stability, he was not really motivated by keeping things safe and secure, but several of them were. So again, that changed. They were like, why do we have to do this? Is this really necessary? Is this the right thing to do? They needed more time to think through this whole rebranding thing and to ask the questions and, kind of vet through the whole idea. And then you can see where the high independence promotes kind of the silos, and then the low enduring. That's where we start a lot more than we finish, right? And the president, CEO certainly contributes to that as well. So what happened next? Great, again, to know all of this information, but what are we going to do with it? So what happened is they came up with some action items. So the first thing was that they realized they tend to lack follow through. They empowered higher enduring individuals, happened to be the marketing manager, and they were encouraged to remind the team of their responsibilities. So the team now had a language to be able to talk about this and be like, oh yeah, that's right, we're low enduring. Yeah, we really need to make an effort to push through this. And the marketing manager could be like, see guys, come on, and they're not viewing her as a nag. They've empowered her to say, yes, you've got this enduring energy. Help to push us over the finish line here. The CEO and marketing director recognizes that new ideas need to be socialized thoroughly to get buy-in. And so for new initiatives and other initiatives just in general, they realize that they've got to build some time in to be able to address people's concerns and give them time to get used to the ideas. And then also, because they were all pretty high independence, they realized that we really need to intentionally make sure that we're breaking down these silos and that we are working together on projects. When we have these meetings, the question is, how can we help you? Or how is this initiative our initiative, not just yours? And some new perspectives. I realize that not everyone thinks the same way I do. I'm not taking it so personally when we disagree. and then we're giving new ideas a better shot. So some great quotes that came out of that engagement. So, in conclusion, all teams have tension, but motivational transparency can really help people explore the tension with neutrality, objectivity, and curiosity, not judgment. And that is the name of the game when you're doing motivational assessment. We're never trying to change. We're never trying to judge. We're trying to understand. And opening up about motivation helps teams to overcome conflict with less drama and find more productive ways of working together. And that's all I've got for you, but we are ready for some questions. And Lucy, I want you to allow me to turn my camera on.
Thank you, Christine. We do have a lot of good questions. I want to start with one that is talking a little bit about motivation with existing teams or team members, where the motivation that they have for personal goals might be different from the overall team goal or motivations that they need to work towards.
So you're saying if the team goal conflicts with a person's individual goals? Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Well, and that's totally going to happen, right? We all have these internal drivers that we often overcome, right? So think about it. Like I have an internal driver to stay in bed in the morning, but my alarm clock rings and I realize that I also have a bigger driver to get myself up, get myself ready and go to work. So I can overcome these things. And I think it's the same type of thing where it's good to, so for example, in this case, we need this new rebranding, right? I don't really like it. I don't feel comfortable with it. I know this about myself that I need more time in knowing this about myself. I can ask for more time. I can let people know, hey, I need some extra time to get used to ideas. So I can understand, we are complex individuals, right? We can work to address and acknowledge what our internal drivers are while still being able to, overcome those or figure out a way to work with the team.
And then the next one that we have is, I think it's a great one. When do you use motivational assessments to work with over a behavioral assessment?
Gosh, well, we love to use them together. And the nice thing about motivational assessments is that they can be used in combination with behavioral assessments. Using a motivational assessment helps you to get to the core, the understanding sort of the why behind the behavior. So, if someone is having conflict, if they're not getting along or they're having issues in their work, it's really, really useful to sort of get underneath and be like, okay, now we understand where that feeling is coming from and why that behavior might be showing up. But it's really useful to use them in combination as well, just because, again, you get that why behind the what that they're doing.
And then I think we have time for one more question. Somebody did want to know, could you talk a little bit about whether or not the IDI would be good for selection purposes?
We definitely use IDI for selection as one piece, right? We would never say that it's a go or no go, red light or green light, but it does give you insights into a person's drivers. It can be helpful as someone's going through a selection process for them to understand, do I really want this position? Is this really something that is going to satisfy me in the long term? And for those, for the team, the hiring team, it's helpful again to understand, this is what you're going to get with this person. This is where this person is motivated. Now, again, having a motivation for something does not necessarily equal a behavior will follow exactly, but it does give you a flavor for how easy is it going to be for this person? How natural is it going to be? What extra support might a person need if they take this position in this particular area because they're not sort of naturally motivated in that particular area?
Thank you so much, everyone. I know we're at time. Coming to your inbox, the slides and recording, the blog post, more answers. We had more questions than we could get to because you guys have been so great. So we'll make sure we get all your questions answered, and that'll be in the blog post as well. We do have certifications coming up, and even our 2025 certifications are actually posted now if you're planning ahead. And I did drop in the chat, if you want to try the IDI, that link is in there, or just reach out to us if you didn't catch it. You can also pre-register for our next webinar, which is coming up next month. Christine will be back and Maria will be joining her, and we'll have more on motivation, more talking at the individual level. We did it. 1 hour on the dot. Thank you all so much for coming. This has really been a pleasure. It's been a great group, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.